All right. Can y'all see the spreadsheet now? Okay, perfect. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you have an albums index action and you have your URI is /albums, when you go to that page, like what will you typically see? You, Eugene.
All the albums.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so generally it's like a list of all of the albums or whatever resource you have. Okay, someone give me the next, another of the 8 RESTful routes. Kate.
The verb is get and the thing is new. So albums/new
Okay.
is the URI pattern.
Okay.
And then the controller action would be albums Octothorpe new.
Awesome. Cool. And what do you typically see? Oh my gosh. Albums. What do you typically see on that page?
Typically, you would see a form that allows you to create a new album.
Okay. Perfect. All right. All right. Can I get another volunteer? Todd.
Okay, so your verb would be get, and URI pattern would be /albums, and then ID,
Cool.
or yeah, and that would be albums Octothorpe show.
Okay.
And you would see usually the name or the title of the album and its attributes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So you're only going to see one album, whichever album matches the ID in the route. Awesome. Hope.
Verb is post.
Okay.
URI is /albums.
Okay.
And controller action is albums create.
Awesome. And is there a page for this typically?
Well, this creates one, so it would tend to route to the show page anyway.
Sure. Yeah, you can route it to wherever you want it to route after it creates an action, but this is like, typically there's no view associated with a create action. Cool. Okay. Who's next? Jake.
You have a get verb. That'd be albums /:ID /edit.
Okay.
And then it'd be albums #edit.
Cool. And what would you see?
That would take you to a form to edit a current album.
Okay, cool. Hope.
Patch.
Okay. Patch. Patch. Okay.
Should go to albums :ID. And the action is albums update.
Okay. And what is this? Is there a view associated with this action?
No.
Okay. And what does this action allow you to do?
Change a row in a table. So it'll change the actual table attributes for that particular album item.
Okay. I'll say we'll update, just so we can be consistent, update specific attributes for that resource. Say album. Okay, cool. I'm gonna cold call on someone who's been a little bit more quiet. How about Jesse? Jesse, what's next?
Would this be a put?
Sure. Okay.
Same URI pattern as above, I think. So albums ID.
Okay.
And same controller action.
Yep.
Albums update.
Yep.
And I don't think there is a view associated with this either, so probably a redirect here.
Okay. And what's the difference between patch and put?
I believe patch will partially update a resource, whereas put will completely will update the entire resource.
Yep. Okay. Absolutely. So we'll update, let's say, all attributes for that album. And I think it also depends on how you use these, right? So you could use a patch to update every single attribute, or you could use a put and it's going to update all of them for you, even if you don't pass in information for the specific resource or for that specific attribute, it's just going to like recreate it with the existing information. So you can kind of use these similarly, but the convention is when you only want to update part of the resource, you use a patch. When you want to update the entire resource, you use a put. Okay, Kira.
I think, oh, never mind. I was going to say, I think Garrett had his hand up. I just had a quick question with
Sure.
the verbs that typically have no view associated with them.
Mm-hmm.
Is there usually a redirect within that action?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, because if you don't redirect, you just stay on that URI and you won't necessarily see anything. Like it makes a weird experience for the user.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Joshua.
I may have missed this, but just to confirm, when you use a put, the record's ID stays the same, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
It's just the other attributes for that
Okay, thanks.
resource. Cool. Okay, who can tell me what the last one is? Okay, Connor.
Destroy.
Okay. Is that the verb?
That would be the verb. Or
Okay.
delete. Delete is the verb.
There you go. Okay.
And then URI patterns albums ID.
I can't spell albums
Neither can
when
I.
I
It's
look at
okay.
it.
And then
All right, well, I'll leave it.
albums destroy.
Cool. Sounds so like ominous. All right, and tell me about this action. Is there a view associated with it?
Removes record.
Okay. And is there a view associated with it?
No.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, there you have it. These are your 8 RESTful routes. Something I want you to pay attention to. These are all pluralized. Albums, albums new, albums ID. So if you ever see a route like this, that's not RESTful. Okay. So like the convention, according to the convention here, And so these are really useful when you, like I said, when you want to CRUD resources. But then sometimes you're going to find yourself creating non-RESTful routes, like /dashboard or like /merchant with a singular merchant, right? You're going to come across this that is going to route to a dashboard controller potentially, or some other type of like non-standard Rails action. See you winking, George. Yeah, potentially. So you want to just keep in mind like the difference between a RESTful route and a non-RESTful route, okay? And you're gonna usually end up utilizing a combination of both, depending on how complex your application is. And there are good reasons to break away from RESTful routing. And then there's also, whenever you can, trying to stick with this RESTful routing convention is always going to lead you down a good path. Garrett.
Yeah, so because we don't want to ever create a route that we haven't built a controller for, I would imagine that using /resources in any capacity is going to typically be a part of the refactoring process and not a part of your TDD app development.
I actually don't necessarily think that's the case.
Okay. So like how can I use resources while following TDD and not creating a route that I haven't built yet?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Garrett. That brings me back to my next point of,
well, okay. I know you can use words, but it seems like more work because then you're gonna have to go back and basically read. Yeah, anyway, continue.
Okay. So I think so what you're going to see, like, especially in production Rails applications, is this resource syntax is going to be widely used. So people don't generally, I mean, from my experience, like hand rolling the routes wasn't generally the convention that was used in most of the Rails applications I've seen. And so I think getting used to this resource syntax, getting used to being able to generate either all of the RESTful routes or just a portion of them, I think is going to be good to have in your tool belt. Do you have to use it? No, you can totally hand roll all of your routes if you want, but you're going to see resources a lot. So let's talk about how we can not generate all of the routes all at once. And Kira, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up to Garrett's question. So then following along with TDD, are you saying it is okay or acceptable to create a lot of routes without having written the tests and then go in and write tests?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
Don't do that. Just create the route you need when you need it and don't generate a whole bunch before that.
Okay.
And so like, let's talk about how we would, there's two keywords that are helpful for only being able to generate a subset of these routes or like a single route using the resources syntax. Do you remember what those are? Anyone? Kate.
So you actually just said one of them. There's only.
Yeah, cool.
And there's except.
Except, okay. So if you want to be more on the positive end, I don't know, if you want to specify like I want this route only, a way to, I can't remember the word that I'm trying to say, explicitly state which route you want to generate. And then a way to except is a way to explicitly state which route you don't want to generate. Okay. So here's what I think. If like you're generating most of the routes and you just don't want to generate one, like except is great. If you're only generating one route and you don't want to generate most of them, then use only. That's how I kind of look at it. So it makes it a little bit easier. Did someone have their hand up? I'm gonna make sure I didn't miss anyone.
I did, and it was kind of that convention, like, okay, we have 8 routes and you're using resources, and so like you're creating 1 only, great, 2, okay, only. So is it like kind of like, okay, now I'm at 5, should I flip it around and be like, okay, so now accept these 3? Does that make sense? Like what is the convention? Okay.
Yeah, that's typically it. And it's really, I think it's for your own ease of use. It's like for whatever makes it easier for you to write these out, like write it that way. I don't think there's like a convention of like, if you want to generate more than 5 routes, like you have to use except. Like, I don't think anybody follows that. So it's just, yeah, these are all just like things that Rails gives you to make your life easier. Cool. All right, let me go back to my Rails application and let's talk about this syntax. So what do you see? What do you see on my screen right now?
We see Adam.
Okay, perfect. That's what I want. Okay, can someone describe, so if I only want to create an index, like route for albums, what would that look like? So this is going to give me all 8. And this, I only want to create I don't know, index action. Okay. Will, I saw your hand up. Did you have a question or?
I did. This is getting to the RESTful routing stuff, but I'm noticing as we're getting this project and obviously what you have below there, but the login, log out stuff seems like a pretty standard functionality of most web pages today. And I'm curious why it's not a RESTful design using sessions.
I don't have an answer to that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question though. And I agree, it does deviate from like typically the RESTful conventions. And I think I have seen people do it slightly different. So sometimes they may not always have this in like a sessions controller. That's typical, but I've seen other people implement it different ways. So good question. I'll have to maybe circle back to that one, but thank you. All right, let's see. I see, Austin, you have a hand raised. Do you want to tell me the syntax for only creating?
Yeah.
Our index?
It'll be resources, albums, comma, and then only.
Like that?
Yep. And then colon after that. Yep. And then square bracket. And then index as a symbol.
Okay, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Awesome. So that is like literally the same as get /albums do so these two are the exact same thing. So when you want to limit your the things that you create, you use this syntax, and then it's basically like an array if you wanted to do, you know, additional things like that. Okay. All right. So 2 ways of, you can either hand roll or you can use this resources syntax. And I'm gonna stop right there. What I'd love for y'all to do right now is we're gonna move into a palm break real fast, just about 5 minutes. And then we're gonna come back and do some exercises around these so that you can just get used to writing the syntax out on your own. All right. So come back at 9:42.
Thank you, 42.
I did. I was thinking about your comments about like RESTful routes and using resources, and perhaps you'll go into this, but when we're doing things like merchant and those non-RESTful, we can still use resources for that, right? Like it's just, we just do the singular of it, or would that be better to hand roll?
So I think those types of routes, you're probably going to find yourself needing to hand roll them, just because you are going to be mapping, well, I don't know. You might be able to use resources. You can. I lied. So one thing we didn't really talk about, let me just share my screen one more time, was nesting routes. All right. So you can create nested routes with resources as well. And so say you want to get all of the songs associated with an album. So you would do something like this. And you'd put it in a block. And then inside of that, you do resources songs like that. And so what this is going to do is it's going to generate all 8 RESTful routes for albums. But then additionally, it's going to generate 8 nested routes for album songs. And we could look at that here if I were to do rake routes. And there's going to be a lot of routes here. So let me just actually comment out some of these just so it's not as busy for us to look at. So when I do this, and again, rake and rails are interchangeable at this point, but you'll see that I'm going to get around like 16 routes, I believe. And so what you're going to find is you're going to have all of the album routes, which we went through, albums, and then you're going to also get album songs. So you're going to get the same RESTful routes for songs, but they're going to be nested under like a specific album ID. Cool. So then thinking through our project, you can also do this with namespacing. And so here's why we wanted the namespacing syntax, because you could do namespace, merchants, do, and then I can't remember exactly how it's set up in your project. I think you probably want, I'm just going to show you this and then you'll have to play around with it when you get time to actually like building it out. But you can still do something like this, like namespace, merchant resources, like song, or maybe like orders. And what you'll find is that namespace under merchant, you're going to get all of the RESTful routes for orders. So if I were to comment this out, we come back over here and you'll see, and I'll use Rails this time, Rails routes. You're going to see the namespacing here. So merchants orders, and then you'll see merchants orders new. And then you'll get all of the RESTful routes for orders, but namespace under merchant. So like there's some things you can do to kind of play around that will help you like more easily generate routes without having to explicitly like create all of these out. But yeah, just some things to think about. And of course, I want you to play around with these things while you're doing your project. But I just want you to know that they exist. Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, let's see. I see a couple hands. I'm not sure who's first, so I'm just gonna start with my screen. Brett, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just curious about the route helpers.
Yeah.
So like in the lesson, it's cat's path.
Yep.
Will that give you, I mean, besides the dynamic parameter one, if you use cat's path, that'll pretty much work for like all 6 of the routes, I guess.
Yeah, let's look at that.
And like you can just use it, like, can you use it on a button as well? Or like a link?
Yep. Yeah, so you can use that in your tests. You can use that in a link. And so this prefix here, when we run Rails routes or rake routes, this is your path helper that Rails gives you. And so like in Capybara, instead of doing like visit, in quotes /cats, you can just do visit cats _ path. So you take any of these and then you do cats like _ path like that. And it'll know that you're talking about this route. And so typically when you see this, and then you see followed by like additional routes, the same, you can use the same prefix for multiple routes. And it's intelligent enough to know, like based on the verb and based on like what path you actually want. So if you did do a cat's path to your, you want to get to your index page, but then you also have cat's path when you're like creating a resource, it'll know based on the verb that's being used what the right route is. And
Okay.
so here,
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's exactly what I was about to point out.
Okay, yeah. So here, this is cat singular path for all of these URIs, and it'll just infer based on the verb, like which one is the correct one.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. Quick question while we're on this topic, how do you pass an ID into a path helper? Does anyone know? I'm not sure if Todd, you wanted to answer the question or you had another question.
No, I want to answer the question.
Okay,
I
great.
remember reading this. So you would put like, if you wanted to show your, so you just have cat _ path, and then in parentheses, you would have the ID number for that.
That's right. So, I'm in features. Okay, so here's one, right? So we're using songs. So instead of doing this, I would do visit song path, and then I would say like whatever my song .id is. I could do that. Does that make sense to everyone? So you like basically just call the path and then you can pass in an ID. And I don't even know if that's like the right path, to be honest. What's the path helper for a show? But how else? There's another way I can pass an ID. There's one more way. Connor, did you have an idea or a different question?
Just a follow-up question to that.
Okay, let's get to that in just a second. Song path, I can also pass in, I'll just tell you, I can also pass in the whole object and it'll know how to get the ID from the object. So just something to make your life a little bit easier than versus like having to write out the whole route. It's helpful when you have more complex and longer routes. If you have namespace routes or if you have like nested routes, this kind of shorthand syntax kind of comes in handy. So keep it on the back burner, but you don't have to use it. Just another option. All right, let's move on to some other questions. I'm going to just start with Brett. Oops.
Sorry, I left my hand up.
Okay, cool. All right, let's move on to Garrett.
So if resources is always creating RESTful routes, I would imagine if we need to create a non-standard route, by definition, we couldn't use resources.
Yeah, you would definitely have to hand roll it. That is correct. So you can, I mean, for the most part, if you're like creating like a slash, if you wanted like a custom, like, hey, like slash hello, and you wanted that to go to like some controller, like a hello controller with a welcome action, right? Like Rails isn't going to generate that for you. You have to define it yourself. But it's like the fun part is you can make up whatever you want. And sometimes it like makes sense to do that. But a lot of times it's like, it doesn't really make sense to do that. So like a lot of times you'll see like a welcome page and a lot of that is typically going to be hand rolled. Okay, let's go to Kira.
I know we only have like 2 weeks left, but I was just curious, since we aren't going to be using put in mod 2, should we, when we resource the routes, always be saying except put, or because it's so similar to patch, it's okay that it's included, but we aren't going to use it?
Yeah, so I would recommend that you don't generate any route that you aren't going to use.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's, so I think the primary reason is it just opens your app up for vulnerabilities. So if someone, nefarious gets a hold of the fact that you have some routes that you aren't using, they could potentially use those to compromise your application, especially when it comes to like put and patch. They would generally route to the same action. So you'd have an action defined for that route. And then, they may be able to like do some bad things. So, or at the least case scenario, best case scenario, it just creates a bad user experience for your users. If somehow they stumbled upon a route, but you're not actually handling it, they're going to get a really wonky error message and they're not going to really know like what's going on. So those are the two reasons that kind of come to the top of my head. I'm sure there's probably some more, but just don't generate routes that you're not going to actually use and handle. Okay. Nick.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the only and except right. So like in the square brackets, we put the controller action that we're routing to. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I was just like putting down some notes here, and it looks like patch and put have the same controller action. So can we only have one of those in like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can use one, right? You can say only like patch if you know you're only going to be using patch. And that's, based on what you have defined in your form, in your view, because you're going to specify like the method that you want to use for that form in in your edit view. So, and then it'll only generate that route. But if someone tried to like change that to be a put, you'd get a no route error. Say like, I don't have a route that uses the method put.
Okay.
And so it would just error out.
So like in the square brackets, we put colon put or we put colon update?
Oh, but it's update. It's not put.
Okay.
Sorry. I totally just, yeah. I maybe like rewind what I just said for the past 15 minutes because it, not 15 minutes, no, seconds, sorry, seconds. Everything else is legit, I promise. So for the action, yeah. It's at that point, I think you're not going to get the error that I said. Like it will accept probably like a put or a patch, but let's see. Or it might generate both. Let me just look. Let's see what actually happens. If I could get my terminal back. Where did you go? It's over here. All right, can y'all see my terminal? Okay. It's actually, I think it might actually generate both now that I see that. So we should get an index and then update. It did. So yeah, I think generally based on the behavior here, I think you're just gonna get both. And I think it must be okay from in my head, I was thinking from like a security standpoint, but honestly, since it's going to the same action, I think you're okay as long as you are handling that information appropriately. You should be fine. But I generally, for other routes, I would recommend that you don't generate them if you're not going to use them. Cool.
Yeah,
Does
awesome.
that help clarify, Nick?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think part of it is just like I'm not very familiar with put at this point, and that we haven't really used it or seen it that much. So
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like honestly, a minor nuance, and it's more of a convention, it seems like, than anything. Because you can do the same thing with both patch and put. So
awesome.
Cool. Okay, I saw a hand from Sage.
Yeah, do we are we fine hand rolling our routes for the final, or are we expected to use the resources syntax now that we've been exposed to it?
I'll have to double check. I'm not sure what the expectation has been or is. I want to say that you're fine hand rolling, but I'll circle back with Brian and Tim and just make sure that that's correct.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. Exactly. You're welcome. Okay. So it is 10 o'clock. I don't want to keep you this morning. What I was going to have y'all do was open up your, on the authorization branch, open up your set list repo and then just refactor all of your routes using the resources syntax. I think that might be a good exercise if you still want to go ahead and do that on your own. And then feel free to, like, if you've got questions or you just want to double check everything's right, like when you do Rails routes, you should generate the same list of routes, no more, no less, if you've done it right. So you know that you can like check it that way. Or if you've got questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll start a thread in Slack. And otherwise, feel free to experiment with the resources syntax within your project. So with that said, I will let you all go. I think the rest of the morning is project work time. And then we've got project check-ins this afternoon. The spreadsheet is in the calendar invite. So make sure your team picks a slot with your PM, and we will see you later this afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Also, thanks for the music.
Absolutely.